So next up, we're cutting to a really technical talk, which I think is awesome. We've had such a great balance in this intro bit of all the soft skills and all the stuff that you have to know that's really important. We're now going to also have Rhys Elsmore for a technical talk. Rhys is someone I think is like a real unsung hero in the bug bounty community. Those that know him just get blown away. Those that triage his reports, we get crazy imposter syndrome every time. I've seen Rhys hack an item, it's been patched, hack it again, it's been patched, and then find 0 day in their build system to hack it a third time. And that kind of tenacity and digging deep is something that he's known for. He does a great job of it. I'm really excited for him and for this talk. And take it away, Rhys.
Well, I mean, that was a really good intro, so hopefully I can live up to the hype. How are you all doing? I'm going to get straight into sharing the slides. So 1 second, we'll get how to Zoom. We'll get going. All right, I'll just get a quick check. Everyone see the slides?
Yep, solid.
Awesome. So let's go. This is Recognition Pride bug bounty hunting. The first thing I'm going to cover is that there are some pictures of fires and natural disasters in here. I'll try and call them out as I go, but yeah, just a heads up. Now, this changed a little bit, right? The format of the talk changed. It now includes 13 P1s, a psychology lesson, and a last-minute change. First of all, I want to give a huge shout out to the organisers, Bugcrowd, and all of the amazing speakers I've seen so far. I got up super early for this. So let's start with an introduction. First of all, I have a lot of duplicates. My queue is full of them. I find them a lot. This is my first bug I ever found on Bugcrowd. It was like 5 years ago. I got paid $0 and 1 point. Recently, I got awarded $20 for a bounty, which allowed me to go out and buy a burger. That was pretty cool. And for the month of October 2019, I didn't find any bugs. I had these competing priorities, right? Lots of family stuff going on, and just lost motivation, encountered that burnout that everyone talks about. Now, the inspiration for this talk started in San Francisco at the end of February. I was in a lift with Casey John Ellis, and we just appeared on Fox TV for a live interview. And basically, we were talking about the Arlo bug bash that had happened several days earlier, and talking about some of the crazy bugs I'd found. And largely, that's what I'm going to cover: crazy bugs. And I can't remember the exact words I used, but it went along the lines of, "Oh, my strategy is I just combine some of the helpful parts of firefighting with hacking." So let's take a bit of a left turn. This is me, Rhys Elsmore on Twitter. I've been on Bugcrowd since about 2015, 2016. I've got 3 hammers from Bugcrowd for taking bug bashes, Most Valuable Hacker Awards. I work for a big blue cloud doing security architecture. I've got 2 Australian Shepherds, and I'm into CrossFit running and jiu-jitsu. Now, these are the dogs. If you hear them bark, it's going to sound really terrible, but yeah, I apologize. They're just waking up. Now, I've also got this really weird side hustle, right? I'm a firefighter with Fire and Rescue New South Wales, which is our state's paid professional fire service. We attend fires, motor vehicle accidents, rescue incidents, medical emergencies. And I've also done a stint as a paramedic, ignore the crazy photo. And when I was 18, I was in a volunteer rescue service. Now, I'm not lying when I say that I use what I've learned in these jobs to improve my hacking. And when I tell people this, the reaction's normally like fascinating. There's questions, and then you see the cogs start to turn as people try and correlate knocking down a door or lifting a heavy tool with hacking into a system. And then they hit a sort of epiphany of, but what if? And they say, well, firefighters try to put out fires. Aren't you hackers always trying to start fires? And, that's sort of true. But as bug bounty hunters, we're trying to do it for good, not evil, make the internet a safer place to be. And realistically, we do have a lot of fires to put out. They're just hidden, and we don't know where they are yet. So I'm going to try again and come at this from a different angle. First responders follow this really old model pretty much unconsciously, and this is what I'm going to be basing the talk around. Don't worry about reading this now. It'll pop up plenty more times, and we'll analyze it bit by bit. Basically, by having this model hammered into me while engaging this emergency services work, I've unconsciously applied it to other parts of my life, and that's include bug bounty hunting. As I'm going to cover, you don't need to work in these jobs to get better at navigating this process. Because really, hacking is walking into an unfamiliar situation, getting familiar with it, and developing a course of action. Over time, you get more experience, more tools at your disposal, more knowledge, and more options. And if you're lucky, a methodology. And I found this is the case. I'll start with an example. So my bug walkthrough is going to take this format. So we have a user, right? And they can send some JavaScript up, and it gets built by our target. That JavaScript, it's got packages in it. So the build service reaches out and grabs those packages, makes a compiled function, And then the target's cloud provider, their value proposition, their service, it calls this compiled function with events and API keys. Now, me as the bad guy, I crafted a tar package and put it on NPM, which was absolutely allowed. I then sent my own JavaScript up to this build service, which went along and it grabbed my malicious package. And for some reason, this temporary file appeared across all of the lambdas. Now, it got a little bit spicy when the user, up in the top left corner, did their second build. For some reason, this temporary file was grabbed, JavaScript was executed, and I was able to steal API keys and catch events and implement malware into these genuine builds. This was a vulnerability I found at the end of last year, and it relied on this file, this temporary file, being in a certain place to set off this whole big chain of events. And naturally, P1 with top rewards. It was this really fun bug to work on and an absolute pain in the butt to replicate. It also got me a report to the Yarn file package manager, which was pretty cool, getting to work with those folks and explain this big long walkthrough of how I was able to implant a file in a certain spot. They were really cool to deal with, prompt service and professional manner. So there's a lot to consider in this bug, right? There's at least 5 points here and a whole lot of trial and error. Remember that bug I showed you at the start where I got 1 point and $0? Yeah, it's a little bit different this time. All that's different is time, experience, and I've learned things along the way to chain these things together and maximize impact. And here's the secret. There wasn't any magic to that P1. It was just a result of this accumulated knowledge and knowing what to do after a whole bunch of trial and error and getting better at recognizing these cues, scenarios, and information gathering. Something I had a bit of unconscious training in. So for the next 45 minutes or so, I'm going to step through the parts called out in red, as they've been the most helpful to me when hunting bugs. I'm also going to include some really cool, fun bugs. I think we've got about 12 more P1s to go through. And I'm going to give examples of where I've taken inspiration from the training and experiences of firefighting to move the needle on my hacking. So here's the layout, right? I'm going to start with the history of the model. I'm going to make on to why I make more time for observation analysis, looking, researching, and generally improving my situational awareness. I'm going to detail my playbook for how I pivot when I'm stuck or don't know where to go next. I'm then going to go into my short, ambitious goals and how I know I'm meeting them. And then finally, taking action, what it means to move from a standard bug into something that stands out and reduces uncertainty. And I'm going to finish off with basically some war stories, tips and tricks, and how I found emergency service work to be beneficial to hacking. So let's get started with the model. This is the same slide as before. Once again, it's the recognition prime model. This is pretty much accepted as the playbook for decisions that emergency service workers make. There's variations of this that are taught. However, this is considered some of the original research. And it was originally commissioned by the military. As you can see, this guy, Gary Klein, and his cohort at Klein Associates, they went through and produced this report for the military. Now, we've got a date of 1990 on there. There's actually been a huge amount of research into how people make decisions, and he started in about 1985. Now, Klein is a psychologist. And him and his cohort, they began to research how decisions were made by these expert decision makers under certain circumstances. Now, this photo is not Gary Klein. I just thought it was pretty cool to imagine this experiment being done with test tubes and beakers. Now, what they realized is when these decisions were being made by these expert decision makers, there wasn't this list of options that was being compared, right? They weren't even comparing two options. And this struck the researchers as odd because it was so early in the project. So naturally, they ended up revising the whole project and eventually came up with a model of how people actually make decisions. But they weren't looking at any decision makers in particular. They actually had a very small focus group, and they were emergency service workers, healthcare workers, defense forces, politicians, any job where critical decisions have to be made in a hurry and consideration given to future decisions. Now, this research focused on these folks because they tend to have a lot of practice making decisions that fall into a certain category. Now, I want to address the elephant in the room first. I made up the words temporal criticality for this slide because having time sensitive in there didn't fit with the descriptors that I used elsewhere. It was just bugging me a bit, so I made up some fancy word. Now, let's talk about the intersection of these three criteria. Basically, these researchers modeled, and what they essentially found is these so-called expert decision makers that they chose typically fall back to one of three paths to take. And it's pretty much applied to most decision making in general. Basically, our brain is constantly picking one of three playbooks to get started with when we have to act. Sorry, my keynote just went a bit weird. I'm just going to go back a slide and then forward. So basically, our brain is constantly picking one of three playbooks to get started with when we have to act. Now, variation one is the run-of-the-mill situation, something that's typical, something that you have to do every day. They're hardwired scenarios with known goals, priorities, and steps where your brain pretty much short circuits without you thinking about it. Imagine walking to your car, you pull out your car keys, you unlock it, you open the door, you get in. Was that a decision you had to make? No, it was pretty much hardwired. So what if you encounter a situation that you haven't seen before where you don't know what's going on? That's pretty much variation two. This is where the decision maker has to diagnose the situation in order to develop a course of action. It takes the form of the if question mark, then I'm going to do something, but they have to work out that question mark first because, well, that prevents complications and misinformation, and they know what they actually have to do. Basically, we're trying to work out what the hell is going on so that we can make a response. And that leaves variation three, and this is the big one. The decision maker has some idea of the situation, but they don't really know what course of action to take. And this is where the recognition-based model comes in. It turns out that there is a process that is followed depending on your experience with decision-making, your familiarity with the situation, your list of possible actions, and the factors influencing decision. Now, this is the process again. We're going to see it a lot. Klein and his cohort found, and this is a really rough decision model, right, that people typically follow this when they're not sure of the steps to take. However, the outcome of you following this process is entirely different depending on a bunch of factors. Mostly, people in typical safe environments don't tend to encounter situations where they're out of their depth and need to be sure of the next steps, where they require an immediate action and they're not sure what to do. When they do encounter these scenarios, a whole lot of factors come into play. What the scenario is, the abilities of the individual, how they react, the tools at their disposal. However, what Klein found was that there was this certain environment that fostered the development of a unique ability to follow this chart under stress, pressure, and uncertainty. And it's folks who work in jobs like these. Pretty much, it's just muscle memory. You're really good at typing because you type for a job. You run a lot, so you get good at running. Turns out that these folk are really good at operating in high-stress environments that require good problem-solving, analytical skills, while still maintaining their composure and deciding on a course of action. Now, that doesn't mean they're great at everything. If you were to put me in a fencing competition, I'd be pretty useless. I'm just good at following this decision model and working my way through things and trying to solve a big problem. And bugs are the absolute perfect problem. This was one from about 2 weeks ago, right? I noticed that the site used Optimizely everywhere. You don't need to know what Optimizely was, but I saw that keyword and thought, okay, this might be a path. Immediately, I thought, Optimizely allows you to embed custom JavaScript as experiments. Okay, cool. The target had a number of public GitHub repositories. My brain immediately went to igrep, repositories for Optimizely API token format. I found a token committed in a branch from way back. I validated that the token still worked. And essentially, I wrote instructions for how to perform stored XSS across every single web property on the target using this token. Basically, XSS everywhere, right? And once again, P1, heavily redacted. But it ended up being a really interesting one to retrospect on, right? Because I've been trying to refine this process and work in why I'm actually operating the way I am. And it told me that this bug had sat inside this intersection of required knowledge, thought process, and this situational awareness. I had to know what Optimizely was. I had to know what it was capable of. I had to know that these secrets appear on GitHub, and I had to know how to tell the story that this was just more than a leaked credential. This wasn't trial and error. This was application of accumulated knowledge learned from past experience. Now, without some sort of framework to what I was doing, I don't think I would have ever found it. And generally, that framework builds your skill from small brain to exploding brain, right? I mentioned trial and error because that's typically, that's where someone unfamiliar with either the process or what the process relates to typically starts. As time progresses, they learn from their mistakes, recount previous experiences, keep doing the same thing over and over until they finally reach genius brain level where they feel comfortable to navigate unknown scenarios. Pretty much these people would be endorsed on LinkedIn for this set of skills, right? All these skills are what expert decision makers end up with. So let's do a quick recap. People typically resort to one of three paths. Our past experience, intuition, cues, bias, requirements. If you're hungry, everything influences a course of action and decision making. Improvement means moving from having to diagnose situations into these programmed responses and better problem solving skills. you can get better at diagnosing situations and making decisions. It's just the truth of it. Now, I want to move on to what the model calls experiencing the situation. It's at the top and it's up there for a very good reason. Now, for bounty hunting, this might mean an entire target or just the area that you're testing at the moment. It doesn't have to be every decision you make. It doesn't have to be a single decision. You use it as you see fit. But before I move on, I want to walk back to the image of me when I first started with bounties. That $0 1-point bounty. This is me on what I like to call one of my random walks. I wouldn't have a plan. I would aimlessly look around trying to find bugs, and I'd do random tests. And obviously this wasn't optimal and led to a lot of repeat testing and wasted time and missed opportunities. Basically, my plan was that I had no plan and I was hoping to get lucky. And it took a lot of frustration, trial and error for me to break this pattern and move into experiencing the situation. Now, I want to give an example of how we work as firefighters. This will set the scene. For the moment, pretend that those firefighters aren't there and we've just turned up. The moment we turn up, the officer in charge will do one thing first. They'll walk around the scene and determine what's going on. For something like this, they might look up there and say, well, the fire's close to a wooden roof. That's pretty dangerous. They might say that tree's leaning over firefighters. That's pretty dangerous. They might look at the smoke and say, well, the fire's early stages. They might say, well, brick, that keeps heat in and it's at high risk of structural collapse. And they might see some, what might be a water tank or something over here. Basically, this is something that's common across emergency services, and it's called the 360 size up in our service. And this has a few key points. This has a few really good benefits. First of all, it builds situational awareness. You can see what's going on. You stop, look, and listen. You get to understand the context, so you can see what the circumstances are behind the thing that's happening. You get to identify key and critical factors, so you know what you need to watch out for and what you might need in the future. You get to capture change. You look at something and you say, well, it's changing a little bit. I might need to consider that. And finally, you get to plan ahead. You say, well, that's something I should worry about down the track. Now, I've appropriated this and I use it for the starting point for all new target sites and features now. I'll give you an example. So this is me. And instead of jumping straight in and hacking with Burp, I went and did my 360 and did up basically a map of the target. And I'll go into what those maps look like. I discovered a paid feature over here, which was basically limiting off some features for premium customers. One of those was data export. Now, I thought to myself, well, that seems like a vector where I might be able to get something juicy. So I paid the fee and I got access to data export. And with a little bit of fiddling, I was able to turn that into an SSRF, which reached out to Google Cloud and got their credentials and essentially gave me RCE. Now, this was another bug that was paid out. And I love Trim's comment there. I was trying to reproduce this, but can't seem to find the blank in my account. It's like, yeah, I paid for it, borrow my account for a moment. Now, this 360 that I did, this target size up, it's really important because a lot of the time when we're hunting bounties, we're walking around with this fog of war. You're going to miss key details. You're going to skip testable areas and you're going to lack this key situational awareness. I wouldn't have known about this paid feature and wouldn't have tested it unless I'd gone out looking for it, unless I'd known, well, these are the areas that I need to cover. So when I'm looking at a target, I do the target size up. I start and I look at the frameworks, languages, and technologies and get a really rough idea of how this thing's built. I go through and make a list of hidden features, things that are paid, things that are unlocked via doing something else, beta features. I identify testing areas, so areas which might have some, things I might want to test, and then make a list of the things I need to know about. If they use Google, I might want to improve my skills with Google. And then finally, I pick out some low-hanging fruit or some things that might be quick and easy wins. And what this ends up being is basically a mind map. I start at the top, I pick the target, I break down bits of infrastructure, and I go down as low as I want, putting questions and comments as I go. I'm not doing any testing. I'm capturing all the context I need so I can work out how I'm going to approach the problem. I'm not getting stuck on this bug chain for 3 hours and losing some important key detail I picked up earlier because I got focused on the wrong thing. I'm keeping my context somewhere. This gives me something I can come back to later on. I can't advocate for this process enough. I'll give you another example. So it begins with my 360. And I find that there's 3 steps that if I follow, it unlocks this data import feature. Like, really obscure steps. You have to go through and set up a custom domain and go over here and register your business. but it unlocks data export, and it wasn't mentioned in any manuals. It seemed to be this really new feature. And basically, data import. So you could throw CSV, TSV, or XML in there. Turns out it was vulnerable to XXE, SSRF, AWS credentials, RCE, yet another P1. Now, without this understanding this target-specific setup and the nuance of how they operate, I would have probably gotten stuck somewhere else or totally missed that this feature exists. So I find massive value in stopping, observing, and obtaining an awareness of what's going on. Now, let's do a recap. Doing a complete size-up of the situation will help you determine the next steps. It allows you to capture key details, map out a target, and identify capabilities and knowledge that you may need. It is absolutely okay to guess if something isn't clear. This is an important skill to practice, and it helps you move along. If I come across a target and I can't work out where they're hosted, I'm just going to say, well, it's probably Amazon or Google or somewhere else, but I'll have to find out later on where that is. But for now, let's just assume they're in the cloud. Anything else I find out later on may change that. And finally, no matter what I do, I start developing a rough plan, but I don't begin any testing just yet. I don't do that until I've got a full plan in place. I know what I'm looking at, I know roughly what I'm going to do, and I know where I'm going to start. Now, our bread and butter as emergency service workers is unfamiliar situations, and they fall just under after you've experienced the situation in a changing context. You turn up, you have a look around, you take in everything that's going on, and then you work out, is this something that I can deal with, that's familiar, and do I have all the information I need? And a lot of the times you're walking in there and saying, I have no memory of this place. It might, for bug bounty hunting, it might be a new program, new framework, new target, new error message, new stack trace, new cloud provider. It doesn't matter, because really the work that we do is about keeping track of a moving, changing target. And the technology that we deal with is wide and varied. You can't be expected to know it all. You will encounter these unknowns. So being able to actually deal with these unfamiliar situations and try and wiggle your way out of them is super important. This is all about walking into an unknown situation, gathering details, and being comfortable to develop a plan. Now, the next few slides do cover a natural disaster in Sydney. I'm going to call them out, but yeah, images of fire and such. So this was our summer. Pretty much this was an outlier in situations that we deal with. This was unprecedented in Australia, pretty much the biggest bushfires that we've ever had. And this never before seen mobilization of tens of thousands of firefighters and this fire behavior that wasn't seen before. Pretty much a new, unfamiliar situation. And I wanted to call out in particular one particular incident that occurred during this multi-month sort of event. Now, this is the sleepy village of Bilpin, which is up in the mountains that butt against Sydney, and it's got beautiful bird calls, orchards, tourists, tranquil mountain lifestyle. And, it's an absolutely beautiful place. And this is Bilpin on a good day. Now, it's a really confronting image, but this was Bilpin in mid-2019. Pretty much a fire front was moving through and nothing was going to stop it. Now, as you can imagine, there's fires all over the state. Resources were super stretched, so they responded trucks from the centre of Sydney to come help with this situation. And really, this isn't down the road. You have the city of Sydney here, you have Bilpin up here. That works out to be about 90 kilometres or 55 miles. Now, one of the firefighters that day from the City of Sydney station was wearing a GoPro, and it turned out to have some really valuable lessons. Now, I want to call out this part of the footage, right? They're at the edge of Sydney here, just about to go up into the mountains, probably about 40 kilometres from where they ended up. Now, this is a pump. They get there, they lay out a whole bunch of hose. So these are city firefighters. They lay out a whole bunch of hose and they get to work. Now, that water lasted about 17 minutes. Those hoses use a lot of water. So they emptied their truck really quickly, trying to defend a house, and then eventually had to say, well, we need more water. And the next shot is where it sort of clicks. They got sent out looking for water, and then you hear them ask a local, hey, do you know where the hydrants are up here? And this is a mountain town, right? Everyone drinks rainwater from tanks. Running water isn't a thing. You had these city slickers in an unknown situation, and really they got the answer that was to be expected. The person on the video says about 50 or 60 Ks away. It turns out to be about 40, but that's still a really long way to go. So this was an unfamiliar situation where things weren't what they expected. And it turns out that they had to drastically change their tactics moving forward. initially, they were also lacking this information that conserving water might be a good idea. I'm absolutely not faulting them on it. It's an unprecedented scenario, teachable moment, and something they won't forget. And it's the nature of this is the nature of emergency services, right? We go to unknown fluid situations, each with their own peculiarities, and really, it's a bit like bug hunting. And what they learn, there's this quote that is absolutely never misattributed that sums it up really well. I actually went out looking for how this quote was misattributed, and people seem to claim it as their own. It's this cheesy line, and I think it's really hilarious that people go out and put their own name under it. But it sort of holds some weight, right? We get better by doing, by experiencing, by learning from our mistakes, and by reassessing. It's one thing to be taught in a classroom, but it's another thing to get out there and get your hands dirty. And this is what I mean when I say you get stuck. Basically, you're in a situation where you know the rough basics, but you're not sure of the exact specifics to move forward. So basically, being able to say, I think I'm going to try this, and moving that direction is a really valuable skill to have. Now, I'm going to call out a few of these skills here, and I'm going to put under the heading of reassessing situations. These are just some methods that I've used when finding certain bugs, and they've worked out to be really, really useful. Now, the first thing I want to call out is collaboration. If you want to see something oh no, wait, you can't see my camera. My phone's going off for a fire call. I'm not going to leave this stream and go take it, so don't worry. First of all, I want to call out collaboration, right? When you need to assess a situation or get some more information, there's nothing better than collaboration. Might be another hacker, an engineer, or just the rubber duck on your desk. It definitely holds some weight. Before I start with this bug walkthrough, I want to stress that this was a program that had a clearly communicated flag, and they were expecting people to walk through multiple layers. I didn't go rushing in without checking that things were okay first. So it starts out with our flag over here. Basically, they were offering up some dollary dues if we could get into this S3 bucket. Now, I began by doing my 360 and getting a really good idea of the target. And based on this 360, I'd encountered a URL with another URL in it, and it was a pretty clear and obvious SSRF. Now, what this gave me was access to AWS, access to Kubernetes, and access to Docker. But unfortunately, it was read-only, and unfortunately, the AWS that I actually wanted was over here. Now, I probably spent a good day and a half hammering this thing, trying all these different options, and I eventually came up with something that stuck, but it would impact prod. It might take down some servers, it might take down the target's infrastructure, it might do it in prod. And really, I didn't know if I'd get the expected outcome out of it. So I didn't do that. I went to my rubber duck, which was another hacker, and I said, hey, I'm stuck. And pretty much they said, did you try dev? And I'm like, no, I didn't think of that. That's an absolutely fantastic idea. So I went back to dev, found the same SSRF, got access to their AWS account, and it turns out I had a role where I could jump into this AWS account. And turns out that role let me read the S3 bucket. Yet another P1, got the flag, pretty happy, paid collaboration bonuses. It all went down well. And I can't speak highly enough of collaboration. Bugcrowd's built for it. You can add other people to bugs, you can pay out percentages, and really, we do go further together. There's absolutely no harm in asking someone else for an opinion or to listen to your issue. Sometimes verbalizing it allows you to move past the problem cycle or obtain a new perspective. We use it enormously in putting together a plan. There's no harm in asking, hey, anyone else have any ideas? So next up, I want to call out documentation. Targets with great documentation are a goldmine for ideas on how you can misuse certain findings or pivot when you get stuck. Yet another walkthrough. I don't know how many P1s we're up to so far. Once again, it starts with the 360. I go through and make a complete map of what I'm going to look for. And this API stood out to me because it had this endpoint, which was get OAuth denials. And really, I'd never seen that advertised somewhere before. I'm just going to take a sip of water. I've never seen the ability to get OAuth denials via an API before. I knew you could get authorizations, but never denials. So inquisitive me, I went out and I denied an application I didn't own. And for some reason, the payload changed. And for some reason, it included this client ID in secret. I'm like, well, that's not supposed to happen. Now, this happens on mobile apps sometimes, and it might be paid out as a P3 or a P2, depending on what you can do. But most of the time, it's either P2, P3, or it requires some sort of user interaction to work with. So I decided to sit down and read the developer docs, get a good idea of how their OAuth system works and what I might be able to do with this. And pretty quickly, I found an endpoint that was basically described as obtain an access token that represents the owner of the OAuth application. And to me, this sounded exactly what I needed. So made up a little call where I sent through the client ID in secret, ended up getting an access token for the app owner. It wasn't me, it was some other dude. And then got access to the API. All it took was a few iterations on different apps, and I got access to the API as the target. Once again, another P1. Sitting down and reading this documentation and taking the time to understand the features and nuance of your target is going to expand the options that are available to you and make you and help you to make better decisions that lead to higher paying bugs with higher impact. Even Googling, the target name and the feature name might reveal GitHub issues, Stack Overflow posts, blog posts, just somewhere you can read more about it. Finally, this is going to be a really fun one, which is read the code. I've got a bit of a strong development background, so this is something I enjoy doing. Basically, you're looking at the truth of how something works, right? You can make all the assumptions in the world about how a library works, but until you sit down and piece it together, you won't know how it actually sort of operates. Now, since 2014, this bug had always fascinated me on github.com. Someone reported an issue where the Ruby XML RPC client may be vulnerable to remote code execution. And this struck me as interesting, first of all, because I'd looked at that on GitHub and never noticed that it may be an issue. And second of all, because, well, I've got a background in Ruby and I know that you can do some absolutely marvelously terrible things in Ruby. Now, the premise was that this client might be susceptible to RCE. However, the research didn't go forward and test it. As it turns out, I encountered a target using the same library in the wild. Now, we'll start with the walkthrough. I go up and I do my 360. I find their API and I find this endpoint where after a quick ping back to myself, it's clear that they're using this client. It's advertised in the user agent, right? That's how I make the connection. Typically, how the flow goes is you offer up an XML response, it gets sent back, the program deserializes it and does what they want with it. But remember, this bug is about object instantiation, does not directly lead to remote code execution, but it often can be used to. Now, I figured that a P1 RCE was a pretty good goal and pretty much said, yes, please, that's something I want to chase, thank you. So I decided to improve my situational awareness. Turns out the full source code for this client is available. It's open source. So I sat down with my coffee, I went through all 639 lines of it, and essentially muddled my way through working out a payload that I could send back to the target that would trigger RCE. And as it turns out, it ended up being pretty succinct after a number of iterations. Basically, if I get a client to call this server and send back this payload and they've got Rails installed or any other library that uses these really common dependencies, pretty much it's going to trigger RCE. I don't know if we can do a round of applause on the stream, but this is the first time dropping an ODay on a public channel. So now, once again, this paid out P1. And it paid out P1 because I went through and read the code and tried to get a full understanding of how something was working on the back end. You can do this on the front end as well. Reading JavaScript can often reveal hidden API endpoints, beta features, or sort of nasty spiders over to the corner. And it gives you a better understanding of what's going on after you send a web request. It doesn't just apply to code though. Having a basic understanding of all layers of the stack can help you recognize scenarios and therefore make better decisions. You might want to learn how HTTP works or DNS works or how domain name registrations work. So let's recap. You're going to encounter a lot of situations where the next steps or impact are unclear. Look to collaborate and research where something seems unfamiliar. You're going to absolutely learn something for next time, and sharing these ideas just takes you so much further. This will help you work to make unfamiliar situations more familiar. Like I said, I had the $0 1-point bounty when I first started out. This has been a case of iterating over a process where I build my familiarization skills. You also need to use the information available to you to get familiar with what something is, how it works, and how it might be broken. This pays dividends in the future, and you're essentially teaching yourself as you go. And once again, don't be afraid to fill in the gaps and make a calculated guess and try something out. You've got so much time to test, you can keep trying and iterating. Now, that's unfamiliar situations. Pretty hefty topic. It's going to start to get a little bit meta as I walk into evaluating goals. Now, for emergency responders, there's a pretty clear goal, and it's preserve and protect people, property, and the environment. If you recognize that a course of action will not allow you to meet your goals that are realistically possible to meet, given the circumstances, it's not the course of action for you. And that's why goals are explicitly called out. Your goals are important while considering a course of action. Sometimes you won't be able to meet them given the circumstances. However, you don't want to put yourself 4 steps back by taking a course of action that doesn't align with your goals. Now, I'm calling out this tweet because I did a search for it and because I have been there about 100 times. You know, we've all been this person on Twitter who had a bit of a moment, didn't save an open redirect, didn't test it for SSRF. You know, these things happen. I could do a talk about 100 bugs where I've submitted, it's been paid out, and then I've realized, damn, I could have done this. Now, here is my absolutely long list of goals when hunting bugs. It's pretty crazy. Find a bug. This covers off everything, except I'm going to add in the goal that I put a lot of thought into it before I decide on a final change for my vulnerability. Now, once I'm at the point of assessing if the action meets my goals, I'm going to take a moment. I'll look at my understanding of the situation and ask myself, have I done everything possible to maximize impact? And can I change this to make it more severe? And this is a little bit of a hard exercise to do, right? Because first of all, it requires knowledge and it requires a bit of imagination. You're essentially trying to think about everything you know about the target, what you've found, its possible impacts, the ways in which it can be used, and how it's going to be communicated and validated. And then you've got to ask yourself, will moving forward with this allow me to meet my goals? It's a really difficult skill to learn. You've got to have so much understanding of all the different layers, and you're still going to encounter blanks. But I want to draw a parallel. Let's take this as an example. The reason why these firefighters are outside is because going inside wouldn't allow them to meet their goals of protecting lives, mostly their own. They've evaluated their strategy and worked out that the building would have been deemed a lost cause, so it's not worth throwing any more at it. We're just going to stay outside and try and defend everything else. In bug hunting, your situation and your planned actions against your goals is kind of similar. I wouldn't take an insecure cookie vulnerability and plan to run with a 5-page report describing the attacks where it can be stolen, misused, and lead to complete and utter mayhem, because typically it's never going to pay out as a P1. It'd just be a sunk cost. So evaluating your goals requires you to say, am I okay with this? Or do I think I can do something else to level up? And when I'm looking at this, I follow a few key points. I want to talk about setting goals and some ways in which you can validate your course of action and ensure that you aren't negatively impacting the situation. So first of all, rerunning the playbook. You've worked through a process to get where you are, and basically rerunning it means taking that and going through it start to finish again. That's it. Identifying your situation, making sure you have all the information, making sure you didn't miss anything, and doing a short simulation of what you think you have in mind to see if you think it'll tick all the boxes and obtain maximum impact. To demonstrate this, I want to use yet another bug. So 360, and I came across a feature where you could supply a template. Basically, it used Mustache, which is a templating language in Ruby. Now, this had a fun bit off to the side where you could set up PagerDuty. It would spit in JSON representing incidents that were raised, and it would send emails out. I won't edit live, but basically foo is a lowercase. Now, I did a lot of fuzzing on this because this absolutely sort of, I knew there was something there. I knew there was spiders there, but I wasn't happy to rest with sort of, P3, P4 speculation. So I went through and I fuzzed a whole bunch of values, right? And I eventually came across name equals dot. And it returned this representation of a Ruby object. And I'm like, okay, cool, we're getting somewhere. That might be a P2. Let's see how much further we could take it. So I started again, and I tried something really evil, which is pipe curlevil.com, and putting a function in the template. And well, it didn't work. This is probably a P10. I might get minus 20 points and thrown to the bottom of the leaderboard. What it did allow me to work out, though, was basically these restrictions. Within my template, I couldn't put spaces, brackets, letters, or dots. But a really interesting thing happened when I worked this out, where, I supplied name as user, and I tried calling a chained function in Ruby, which is basically taking incident.name, that's a string, and calling the constantized function on it. And what that spat out was hello user. And, I thought, if I'd said incident.name, that would have been true, but constantize, it's also thrown out user. Now, what this method does in Ruby is it takes a string and turns it into a reference to the class. Basically, I can get the string for user and turn it into a class. Now, this struck me as P2, but I thought, well, no, there's got to be something else there. And then I remembered back to my Rails development, and I could just chuck all on the end. I thought, okay, now we're getting somewhere. Then I send in user, and it spits out every single user record. I end up crashing the service because I couldn't limit it at all. This is definitely P1, read access to all of the data that these folks have, and the ability to call delete all as well. So once again, this methodical work through of thinking, I wonder if, and trying out some different things. And yeah, it paid a P1 again. That's rerunning the playbook based on your goals. If you've got the time and you haven't exhausted every option and you're just fishing blind, it's a really good way to reset your thought process while being sure that you're doing everything possible to maximize that impact. I now want to cover what I call being ambitious. This is just like a really thought leader term, right? This is essentially the human element to bug hunting. Typically, we look at it like the triage is over here and we're over there. But I want to explain it with a bit of an example. So I did the 360, and I came across this tier 4 web application. So tier 4 paying out a tier 4 level bug. And it was covered in spiders. You could see the dust coming off the thing. And it turns out that there was a GitHub repository with its source code in there. And it didn't take long to identify an RCE. So we've got RCE in tier 4. And it's like, yeah, cool. I don't want that. I want a tier 1 RCE. And I know that's just greedy of me, but always trying to expand knowledge and find out more about the target. I was wondering if they'd let me in. So all I did was reach out to the program owner and I'm like, hey man, do you mind if I try and escalate this to a tier 1? And they say, no, go for it. Just don't break anything. It turns out that I could access the S3 bucket in tier 1 and get all of the application source code. And to them, this stood out as a P1. You've got this person who can basically jump over into our tier 1 applications for any tier 4 application. That's something we're glad we found out about. We're glad the researcher tried this. We definitely got value from having this program. Now, if I just stopped at the tier 4, they may not have known that and they wouldn't have gotten value out of the program. So it's like this mutually beneficial thing, right? If the program owner is willing to work with you, sometimes being ambitious can go a really long way. Finally, I want to cover being responsible, and I want to do it for a very good reason, mainly as a public service. Now, in a normal talk, I'd pause to take a water break, and I'm just going to do one right now. So this is mainly as a public service and to ensure you don't get the wrong message about some of these exploit chains. Bug walkthrough, 360, discover an application. Turns out I can send a zip up to it with an XML file inside. That XML file is unpacked and it leads to XXE. That gives me an SSR. Let's start again. XXE. That gives me an SSRF, which basically leads to AWS credentials. Now, I reached out to the program owner and I said, hey, do you want me to try and escalate this a bit more? Do you want to see where this leads? And the answer was nope. And that's absolutely fine. Being responsible is about making sure you don't overstep any boundaries while you're chasing your own goals. Not operating with the blinders on, operating out of scope, making any decisions that may negatively impact the direction of the bug. Whenever I feel like I may be stepping out of scope, I always confirm with the program owner. I find that cementing this as part of my process is incredibly important. Not only that, it helps you build a rapport and a relationship with the program owner. If you encounter something and you're not too sure, you can always send them a message. So let's recap. You need to consider your goals as part of your overall strategy. Having the goal of getting a submission is really different to getting a P1, and they're really going to have different strategies. Don't be afraid to take what you have and go back to the start of the playbook. I mentioned rerunning the playbook and how it yielded some really good results. There's definitely value there. You're going to pick up things you didn't miss, and it's going to allow you to sort of pick up areas where you need to do more research. If this information is missing, practice making these informed assumptions. I've called them out in every slide. It's going to help you move forward instead of getting stuck on details. Being able to ask the question, I wonder if, or could this work? It's how I found so many of these different bugs. That yarn vulnerability where, I was able to write arbitrary files, that started out by me saying, I wonder if yarn's vulnerable to something, reading a bunch of code and then hacking away. And, you've got to be ambitious. The idea that if you imagine if a particular course of action will help, you've got to imagine sort of this course of action will help you meet your goals, like, hey, I'm going to reach out to them and, see if they can give me any more information or let me do this thing. You have these goals in mind. The program owner is probably going to be willing to help you. And if you can't think of a better course of action, submit the bug. It's better than doing nothing and losing time. And you're going to think of something later and remember it for next time. So pretty much evaluating your goals is asking yourself, hey, am I okay with this as is? Or can I do something else to level up? Now, I had to drop the conference name in there at least once. Finally, let's call out taking action. This is going to be the final part of the talk. And it's going to be a little bit different to the previous format. These are actions. They're called in there as a thing that you plan for, that you run mental simulations on, and you work out, is it going to work? And you build these actions off your goals, cues, and expectancies. And this is where the firefighting actions and the hacker actions don't exactly see eye to eye. As such, I have a really poor comparison to make further along, but really putting water on fire and taking the safety conscious option and doing things by the book has no place in information security. There's one thing I want after I take action, and the target reads my reports. And just absolutely one guess what that is. That's right, utter chaos. Basically weaponizing this model for navigating the unknown, finding these bugs, but instead of taking actions to restore normalcy and protect the community, I'm coming in and setting everything on fire. Chaos is a value you should hold while while acting in bug bounties. Now, within the model, for us to ask will it work occurs in a number of different places. But most of all, it occurs here when you're going through it. You've reached a point where, hey, I've got this plan. I've got to work out if it will work. Now, we get the luxury of being able to test over and over and determine if something works or will work. Short-circuiting that and knowing something will work is beneficial and comes with time. But until you get there, trial and error is absolutely okay. I still do it. We also get this luxury of taking time to build complex vulnerabilities, taking days to research a topic, if not weeks. This typically isn't seen in emergency scenarios. We have these time-constrained situations like CTFs and bug bash, but they're the exception, they're not the rule. So when I ask, is this going to work? I'm looking at questions like this because this is where I've encountered so many issues before. When I'm ready to write my report and I submit, I start to ask myself questions. Testing things is easy. Trying over and over and getting the perfect chain can be something you can perfect with time. But this triage process is the absolute devil. Once the report is submitted and communicated, a whole bunch of uncertainty of process is introduced into the system. And really, you can't control the triages, the program owners, but what you can control is doing your very best to ensure that you've prepared and done the legwork and adequately conveyed impact, mitigated uncertainty, spoken a common language, and covered all of the options. You're the security person who's coming in and saying, hey, you have a problem. They may not be security conscious. You've got to communicate it in terms that they will understand. And we've all got bad experiences with triage. You can't control some of it, but you can mitigate and reduce the risk of negative experiences. I'm going to draw a really quick parallel. We chuck these on our back whenever we go into environments with heat, oxygen deficiency, toxic elements, smoke. And when we get these things on, they have this pre-flight check, and it looks a little bit like so. You're looking at certain parts and making sure it's up to standard and what you expect. And I check mine methodically, religiously, and I do the same thing over and over. I don't take shortcuts, I don't speed up the process, and I do it for a very good reason every time. It's because if I'm in here, I want to know that everything I've done to mitigate these risks, I've done. That's something I can control to make myself safer. And it's this accountability I can have to make sure I've done things properly. And really, taking action is about the same thing. That is writing and submitting my report. I want to mitigate all the risk that I can, and that's where I make sure to take some extra action. So first of all, demonstrating impact. Another bug walkthrough, and I've got to wrap this up very quickly. Went through the target, found a GitHub repository, and there were some spiders in there, and there was a reference to an app named .azurewebsites.net. And pretty much it turned out to be a 404. So I calmly proceeded to go and register the domain, right? I didn't rush at all. I just went over there and registered. Came back to the bug, and I had a look at my app, which was now running in Azure, and it was receiving so many webhooks and JWTs, like a whole bunch. These were tokens that let me call back into the target and webhooks containing really valuable information. And once again, paid out as a P1. That was demonstrating impact. I could have simply alluded to the 404 of the domain, but that wouldn't have given me clear communicated impact, saying, hey, there's this application that you used to know, that you used to run that now 404s, it's not P1 worthy. You're the voice of security. Tell, or better yet, show the target what you found is bad. Now, along the same lines is the POC or GTFO concept. This leads on from demonstrating impact. Basically, we're looking to produce a start and end story that communicates the severity of an issue. So 360 found a third-party developed training tool that was related to the target. Now, having a look at the clients, I could pull my information, and in the classic example, I could pull other people's as well. And it had references to these secret keys in there, but really I had no idea what this absolutely meant. So I went back and I looked for more situational awareness, read some documentation, client ID goes into JWT, secret key signs it, calls back to the target system, allows access to the target's public APIs. Cool. Okay, well, this is a start. Let's enhance that a bit. Go through, get more awareness. It's essentially a third-party add-on. Target has installed this add-on. Therefore, I could access their instance. Therefore, I could read write all of their data in this instance. And what that led to was yet another P1. And I love the title line. I had to redact some details, but I decided not to shitpost as the co-founder of the company who was good mates with Casey, whose account I got into. Now, that's POC or GTFO. Basically, I've told the start to end story where it demonstrates this real world impact. I could have stopped at the IDOR. I could have stopped at postulating that I could have access something further, but instead I demonstrated that I could, and I was a good citizen while I was doing it. And finally, mitigating uncertainty. As you've seen, some of my reports are extremely complex from the point of view of external services, timing attacks, race conditions, demonstrating these steps. Mitigating uncertainty is basically saying, okay, I've got this bug, I'm going to submit it. There's a chance they might not be able to rerun it for whatever reason. Now, this one starts out with the user, right? They can push JavaScript to a build service, npm, get some tar packages, provider stores a function. They then call it with events and API keys. Me, malicious tar, do the same build, pulls my malicious tar, file gets put there, another build gets pushed, the temp files run, RC as a service. Yeah, it was a different version of the original bug, pretty much similar vector. They didn't fix it properly, and yeah, it worked out to be another P1. Turns out they changed a few things. I broke a few things more. However, this had some really sort of weird circumstances, right? It was a careful timing attack where I had to be on the same tenant as someone else, and I could potentially impact genuine customers. I did a 45-minute video explaining it. I provided full source code where I wrote checks to make sure that I was only attacking my other user account and put some poison pill functionality in there so I didn't impact genuine builds. That's mitigating uncertainty, giving the program all of the walkthroughs, all the tools, and all of the evidence to support your claims in language that they understand. You want to provide hints, tricks, infrastructure to help with your report be validated with ease. You want to demonstrate impact. If the target permits, being able to show rather than speak, speaks volumes. When there is uncertainty, mitigate it with video POCs and diagrams of how you think the bug works, and be the translator between security and real-world impact. And make sure you do the legwork to ensure acceptance of the issue without this back and forth. Now, let's wrap it up. I didn't cover how the process sometimes has rough edges and it takes a bit getting used to. Being able to master and stay on top of a moving target where you need to sort of be, it's absolutely exhausting. And I find myself falling back to reference materials and sort of getting stuck reading blog posts and trying to work out what my next step should be. As I said before, $0 first bounty, 1 point. But there isn't any magic here. Doing something over and over will help you get better at it. And I've outlined some ways in which you can try and level up a bit quicker. As bug bounty hunters, we have these endless possibilities and really unfamiliar situations. The requirement to have a wealth of knowledge and go through so much trial and error, it's a tough thing to work through, and it's okay to feel stuck and like you don't need to know, or you don't know where to go next. It's something I do all the time. All I'm trying to do is to get more endorsements on LinkedIn for these sort of things and sort of muddle my way through. And that's the end of the talk. I'm going to take some water, and I think we move to question time now.
We do. Still amazing though. So when you're ready, yes, there we go. Here he is, Rhys. Wow, what a talk! That blew my mind, and well, it's so magnificent to see that the way that you walking us through this. In the beginning, you're like, oh, where's this even going? And now I'm just grasping. At least I understand bits and pieces what's going on inside your brain. Super cool. But we got a bunch of questions from the audience that's been partaking in this, and I'm just going to fire off with the first one here for you, if you're ready for that.
Absolutely.
So the question is, I heard from different bug hunters that focusing on 2 or 3 classes of vulnerabilities that you are more adept on can tend to be a good method when you're testing a target instead of just trying to find everything. How do you approach that?
It definitely is something, right? Like if you want to upskill and become a master at something, well, you're going to get really good at finding it. And there's no reason why you can't do that for every sort of class of vulnerability. Picking one and saying, I'm going to become really good at this, you're going to learn a whole lot of information along the way. Then the next time you go and choose a class, well, you might have a bit of a head start from all the other things you've learned. You might be able to sort of compare topics. I think we need both generalists and these masters of certain classes to work together, right? Like, there's going to be skill sharing. There's going to be folks who are, it's going to get different results for the program owners and make the internet a safer place. So I think both methods are absolutely valid, and really I flip-flop between the two. That bug I initially showed where I had to learn these topics of unpacking NPM packages and repackaging targets and timing attacks, that was trying to be sort of, mastering these really obscure topics that we don't see too much. So I think as long as you pick a path and say, I'm going this way, and you do it with sort of the right goals and mindset, I think you're going to have success no matter what.
Cool.
So another question we got was just if you could elaborate a bit more about your mind mapping and your note-taking service. Like, how do you approach it? What are you using?
For sure. Look, I'm really old school. I don't think I called it out, but I'm an enterprise guy, right? Like I work for a big blue cloud. I use Lucidchart for capturing these mind maps because there's no set schema. I can just put in whatever I want and break it up however I want. That's what I found to work. It's it's pretty cheap as well. I'll give a shout out to Trello as well. I use Trello boards for managing my actual plan. I've found, and I should do a blog post about this, I found a really good system for storing both bugs and places to attack. And when I learn about a new sort of bug, I can apply it to the places I've already looked at, and a bit about how I break up components and what I'm going to test. So that's a lot to cover in the answer. It's something I should probably cover in a blog post.
Very cool.
But yeah, mind mapping, Lucidchart, goal tracking, Trello.
Awesome. Hey, Rhys, I had a question. You're talking about collaboration in there and some of the parts where you've reached out to others to help. How do you know who to collaborate with? Like you've been in the game for a long time. You clearly, have you're comfortable doing this type of thing and reaching out to people in that sort of way. Like what would you recommend for someone who's new to forming that sort of network to fill in their knowledge gaps?
Walk up and say hi. Like, the Arlo Bug Bash, I knew one person there apart from the Bugcrowd crew, and basically walking up and saying, hey, I don't know anything about the hardware hacking you're doing, but do you mind if I ask a bunch of questions? I learned an absolute whole bunch, and it wasn't scary. Good people to work with. And if you approach someone and you get attitude, it's probably someone you didn't want to talk to anyway. There are really awesome people in this community, and they are the majority. Walk up, start talking, and people are going to be receptive. People are going to share ideas.
That is definitely true. Speaking of the Bug Bash event, you did receive a hammer, right?
I think.
Oh.
they are up here if you can see them on the screen.
That's so cool. And the reason why you are able to find these really, really cool bugs and doing and being able to materialize your thinking into these bugs by following all the experience that you had in the training prior. At what age did you learn that? Like, because you didn't just wake up and having all these things?
I'd say about 3 years ago, I identified the process and that my mindset had sort of changed into operating this way. And I don't know if it's like turning into a grumpy old man or if it was just reaching a certain tipping point of particular training or the quality of training. But it was being able to identify these certain patterns that I was using over here and these patterns over here and saying, hey, there's this massive intersection here and these massive similarities. Let's try and refine the process of both. And really the bug bounty stuff has sort of changed how I work with emergency services as well. I think about things from a different angle. I slow down a bit more. I try to take more information in, and I think about sort of, there are some situations where I can draw parallels with bug bounty work. So I think they complement each other, right? But yeah, probably about 3 years ago, it really sort of took off, and that's where when I started to sort of really explore these massive chains of vulnerabilities.
Cool. Also, you talk in your slides, you're mentioning the 360 overview, right? And
Yep.
I just have to ask, have you built your automation to do that for you? Do you get prepared reports you put in your domains in that delivers you this Rhys file that you dig into, or how do you approach it?
Look, at the moment, it's manual. I've got some tools that I run. Like I think every hacker's dream is the Iron Man computer system that alerts you when your coffee's done and when the bugs are ready to go. Right. I think the trade-off is that that's such a rabbit hole. You have to sort of balance it out, because you can go so far doing that without any validation on what you're doing and if it's correct. So all I've started out with is simple tools, or sort of what the community provides. I also mentioned that I've got a development background. I should mention I wasn't really good at it. I was good at breaking things and shipping poor code, but yeah. Basically, I haven't built my own tooling yet because, well, I don't think I've got the bandwidth for it. But if you want to collaborate, yeah, just hit me up.
I'll definitely do that. Let's create the future of engines that do magic stuff, that put magic stuff out, so we can find the cool P1 bugs. I'm down with that. Collaboration anyway. I'm always up for collaboration.
Oh, just come get a beer. Come to Australia and get a beer or something.
You're overdue, mate. You're overdue.
Well overdue.
That was great. I want to say thank you from us. I mean, definitely having seen at the last Arlo Bash, seeing you just network to tie together the P1 that you landed was great. You went over, you picked the hardware brains guys, you picked other people's brain. It definitely sums up one of the things we recognize that you are so talented at is networking and deep diving to just bring it all together. But thank you very much.
Awesome. No, thanks for having me, and it was a super fun talk to prepare. Looking forward to staying up and watching the rest of them.